All right, wife, we're going to start hard and fast here with chapter 22, titled Out of the Stone. So it starts out with Rand and Egwene, and they're just talking as they lead the entire Aiel force out of the city. And everyone's like, oh my god. And Egwene's like, should you really have let them take the fifth? And what you get out of this conversation is apparently when the Aiel take over another area, a lot of times in modern history, whoever wins a battle will pillage the area and take all the valuables for themselves. The Aiel don't do that. They believe in the fifth, which means they take exactly, including no more than 1/5 of the entire wealth of the population. And so when they took over the Stone of Tyr, the Aiel took 1/5 of the riches that were in the Stone of Tyr. So they're all carrying like tons of gold items and jewels and stuff from the stone, and the people of Tyr obviously not super stoked about that. Moiraine steps in and is like, "All right, what are we doing? What do you mean we're going to Rhuidean?" And he's like, "Well," Rand says, "I'm taking you to Rhuidean by a portal stone." In a lot of my reading, I found out that there's a portal stone only about an hour from here. And he talks about how he pieced together a bunch of these little details from different texts to figure out that there's a portal stone there, and he's pretty sure. And so once they get to the area, they send out some Aiel. Rhuarc, the clan chief of this group of Aiel, sends out some of his folks, and they try to find the stone. While they're doing that, Rand is talking with Rhuarc about how he hopes since the Aiel are divided into 13 clans, he hopes that they will give up their blood feuds right now. And Rhuarc just says, well, we follow the prophecy, and all of us seek he who comes with the dawn. And it is rule and law that nobody may shed blood on the grounds of Rhuidean, so it will be a safe place. Eventually, an Aiel indicates that they have found the stone, and so everyone goes over there. Rand looks at the stone and figures out of all the symbols on there, him and Rhuarc help figure out one of the symbols means Rhuidean. And so he tells everyone, all right, get as close together and cramp in here as close as you can. So everyone's like really, really squeezing in there. And Rand channels saidin. He does it with the help of an Angreal he found in the Great Hold in the Stone of Tyr. It's a little fat man statue of a guy holding a sword across his knees, but it allows Rand to channel more of the one power than he could unaided. And as soon as everyone indicates he's ready, he does channel that power, and the world blinks out of existence. Chapter 23 is titled Beyond the Stone. Egwene notices after stumbling that they are in somewhere new. Sand everywhere with these odd pillars. And she's like, he was right. And Matt is like, we made it. And he's laughing. He's like, burn, we made it. Light, it's hot here. But man, we made it. And suddenly Rand is on his knees, supporting himself with one hand on the ground, clearly exhausted. And Moiraine immediately goes up to him. And she's like, that Angreal was not sufficient to the task. You must not do this again. And Rand's like, Moiraine's like, if you take chances, they have to be for a good reason. And Rand's like, I don't take chances. Matt's the fellow for chances. But it doesn't matter. It worked, and that's what's important. I've outrun them all. It worked. Moiraine heals Rand by taking his head in her hands, and he feels cold. And shivers, but it works. Except for the wound in his side, of course. But Rand says, ask, Moiraine. Ask first. I'm not your pet dog. You can do whatever you want to. And Egwene's like, oh my god, he's so ungrateful. But Rand doesn't pay any attention to it. And suddenly they hear a voice. They hear a woman's voice, and she offers them the peace of Rhuidean and greets them. And introduces herself as Amis. Yeah. Amis, I don't know, but Amis. It's spelled Amys, if that gives you any idea. But all the men relax suddenly because they weren't apparently sure that there would be peace in Rhuidean, even though it's law and custom that there would be. But the sight of Amis greeting them and offering them peace calms them all down. Ruark goes up to Amis and is like, I bet you didn't expect me to turn up like that. And you get from that they're married. Ruark is Amis's husband. And Amis just says, I knew you would be here today. And Egwene gets from that the wise ones were used dreaming in Teleran Riod to find that out somehow. And she was kind of filled with excitement. She couldn't wait to start learning how to do it. Rand, Mat, Moraine, and Lan all tie these white cloths dipped in water to their heads, with Lan saying, the heat will kill you if you're not used to it. Everyone then looks to another Aiel man with red hair, and not a big fan of him. And, Ruark is eventually like, do the Shaido lack a clan chief, Couladin? And this man, who is apparently named Couladin, says, oh, well, Muradin has entered Rhuidean. Should he fail, I will enter. And one of the wise ones, one of the older ones, says, you have not asked, Couladin. Should Muradin fail, then ask. We are 4 wise ones, enough to say yes or no, enough to grant you permission to enter Rhuidean. And Couladin's like, it's my right. And she's like, it's your right to ask. It's our right to answer. But I do not think you'll be allowed to enter, Couladin. You are flawed within. The wise ones just ignore him at this point and look at Rand. And Rand kind of bows, and he says, by the right of blood, I ask leave to enter Rhuidean for the honor of our ancestors and the memory of what was. And Amis is like staring, like surprised, and she's like, and her and Bear are like, I answer yes. And then the Couladin's like, he's not even Aiel. He can't come in. He should be killed for this. But the wise ones are like, do you want to be a wise one, Couladin? We'll put a dress on you and see if you can be trained. Until you do, shut up. And Rand just says, my mother was Aiel. And Egwene's like, what? His mom died when Rand was a baby. But he does kind of look like an Aielman. Interesting. But Amis just says, no, not your mother. Your father. And Egwene is still like, this is madness. She doesn't understand. And then the third wise one, answers, yes, I give permission. And the fourth says, it must be done. I answer yes. And Amis is like, you've been answered. You may go to Rhuidean, and suddenly she cuts off. Mat runs forward and copies Rand's bow and says, I also ask to enter Rhuidean. And they all stare at him, and even Rand like whips his head around, surprised, like shocked. Couladin picks up one of his spears and puts it at Mat's chest. Suddenly, the Amis and one of the other wise ones, Melaine, they start to channel and fling him back. And Egwene's like, oh my god, some wise ones at least can channel. And Moraine is just still clearly surprised. And Couladin's like, you accept this outlander? So be it. But this other one, he's not even Aiel. This sacrilege. And Melaine, one of the wise ones, is like, all of you leave. Couladin, you other guys, Ruark, this is wise ones. And this is between the wise ones and the people that want to go in. And she sends everyone away. And then Amis is like, young man, you don't know what you've done. Leave. And Mat's like, desperately, she's like, I can't. I've come this far, but this doesn't count, does it? I have to go to Rhuidean. And Melaine is like, you can't. It's not permitted. You do not have Aiel blood in your veins. But Rand has been staring at Mat this whole time and says, he comes with me. You gave me permission, so he can come with me whether you say so or not. And Melaine is just like, it's not permitted. No woman may go in more than twice, no man more than once, and none unless they have the blood of Aiel. And the fourth wise one, Sienna, she's like, much is changing, Melaine, the old ways. And the other wise one, Bear, says, if he is the one, the time of change is upon us. The Aes Sedai stand here. A'Aleen is here with his shifting cloak. We don't really know what that means yet, but it means to be A'Aleen, or An-Aleen seems to be like a foreign word. We don't know what that means, but she's like, A'Aleen is here with his shifting cloak. But Amis is like, we can't hold. All stands on the edge of change. Melaine? And Melaine nods, and Amis is just like, it's done. What are your names? And they're like, Rand, al'Thor, Mat Cauthon. And Amis gives them a spiel. She's like, you must go in. Most that do enter Rhuidean do not come out. Some come back mad. You may not have food or water in remembrance of our wanderings after the breaking. You must go unarmed. If you have weapons, place them on the ground. They'll be here if you return. Rand takes his belt knife off and lays it down, and then he hesitates, but he adds the little stone carving of the man. Mat takes off his belt knife, and then the knives from one sleeve, and then the knives from his other sleeve, and then the knives from his coat, and then the knives from the back of his neck, and then he pauses, looks at them, and they are like, what? And then he takes 2 more from each boot, and he's like, I forgot those. And then they're like, we will not, that you are now dead. Until you return, the living will not speak to you. And so Rand and Mat leave, and they start to make their way deep into the heart of the city of Rhuidean. And Mat asks Rand, are you crazy yet? Like, I want to come back alive. And Rand's like, so do I. As they go off on their own, we stick with Egwene. And Egwene's like, Amis, I'm Egwene el'Vir. You said I should come here. And she's like, Aline, you go away now. And you get that they're talking to Lan. Moiraine's like, why do you call him that? And Amis is like, we know of him. The last of the Malkiri, the man who will not give up his war against the Shadow, though his nation is long destroyed by it. There is much honor in him. I knew from the dream that if you came, it was almost certain Aline would as well, but I did not know he obeyed you. Then Bear, one of the wise ones, and Bear is spelled Bair, Bear comes and says, Aviendha, come here. And to Egwene, it looks like Aviendha looked afraid, which would be absurd. And Bear just says, it is time. You have run with the spears as long as you can, longer than you should. And Aviendha's like, I'm a maiden of the spear. I don't want to be a wise one. I won't be. And Egwene is like, oh, she's going to be a wise one in her mind. And Amis is like, I too refused when called. My spear sisters broke my spears before my eyes. And then they took me to Bear and Codalin bound, hand and foot, naked. And they tucked a pretty little doll under her arm, Bear says, to remind you how childish you were. As I remember, you ran away 9 times in the first month. And Amis is like, yep, and made to cry for every single one. But I only ran away 5 times the second month. And then Amis looks at Aviendha again and says, but you are not a child. It's time to put away dolls and spears and become the woman you're meant to be. And suddenly Egwene is like, now I know why I like Aviendha so much. I knew why I felt like we were almost sisters. Aviendha can channel, just like us. And then she looks over at the wise ones. She's like, Amis and Melaine, they can channel too, but Bear and Sienna cannot. And now I can sense it from Moiraine. And this is the first time Egwene has managed to get the ability to sense whether someone else is able to channel or not. So that's kind of a big deal. And Moiraine is, Bear is like, so, Aes Sedai, you want to take Aviendha to your White Tower, but she's not one of you. She's Aiel. And Moraine's like, but she could be very strong. And Melane's like, we will teach her to be strong. Aviendha hands over her spears and buckler, and they throw them to the ground. And then they're like, don't forget your Cayden sword, Aviendha. New clothes will await your return. And Aviendha strips, takes off her coat and breeches and her boots, and, yep. So, Amys says, in Rhuidean you'll find 3 rings. Step through any one, and your future will be laid before you again and again in variation. They won't guide you wholly, you will forget them, but you'll know enough to remember what things must be and what things can be. Some women never return from the rings. And Egwene's like, oh my god, she's talking about a ter'angreal in her head. Egwene squeezes her arm, and then suddenly Aviendha starts running down the mountainside, trying, supposedly, it almost looks like she's trying to catch up to Rand and Mat. All the women go back to a tent where they're given water and shade. And there's these Aiel who are just in white, who appear to be servants, which catches Egwene off guard, because she's like, oh, I thought every Aiel was a warrior of some kind. But then she's like, well, no, they have to have, like, craftsmen and weavers and stuff, so why not servants? And she asks, is it only wise one to have servants? And Melaine, like, chokes on her wine. She's like, servants? These are Gai'Shane, not servants. And she seems to think that's obvious, and Moiraine's like, what is Gai'Shane? In the old tongue, that is like those sworn to peace in battle. And Amys is like, do you not know of Ji-To? And by the way, wife, I'm spending some time on this because this is the introduction of an entire culture. It is rare that we will get this much, like this degree of culture from anyone else introduced in the series. It doesn't happen very often because there's only so many groups of people, right? But the Aiel are very important to the story, and it's very, it matters in terms of how to understand how they think. So you have to understand that the Aiel care very much about honor and obligation, or maybe honor and duty, as Moiraine tries to put it herself later on. So just keep that in mind. I'm talking about this, I'm spending a lot of time on it because it's important to introduce these characters way forward. So, so they're like, do you know of Ji-To? And Moiraine's like, that means honor and obligation. And so Amys is like, all right, so when we dance the spears, which you know means fighting with spears, when you dance the spears, the most Ji, which means honor, is earned by touching an armed enemy without killing or harming them in any way. It's the most honorable because it's difficult. The smallest honor, the smallest amount of Ji, comes from killing, because anyone can kill. Gai'Shane are captives that are taken that way, warriors who have been touched. Or they are people that have been taken captive after losing a battle. A Gai'Shane has To to his or her captor. So Ji-To. Ji is honor, To is like debt, something like that. And then Amys says, for Gai'Shane, the to be Gai'Shane means you must serve for 1 year and 1 day, obeying everything humbly, touching no weapon, and doing no violence. And Egwene's like, wouldn't they try to escape? I certainly would. And she thinks to herself, I'll never let anyone make me a prisoner again. And Siana is like, it's happened, but there's no honor in it. Any Gai'Shane who turned away, who ran away, would be returned by his or her clan and start their day and a year all over again. In fact, someone else from their clan might come with them to also serve as Gai'Shane to kind of discharge that To that the clan has on behalf of that action. And then Bear starts to laugh, and she's like, when I was a girl, and the Sharad and the Tomanel were stealing each other's cattle and goats every night, Chenda, the roof mistress, of Main de Cut. Just remember, Sharad and Tomanel are two clans, and they were stealing each other's goats and stuff. And Chenda was pushed aside by a young water seeker during a raid. She came to the valley and demanded that boy make her Gaishain. She wouldn't allow him to gain the honor of having touched her because she had a carving knife in her hands when he did. A carving knife! It was a weapon, she claimed, as if she were a maiden. The boy had no choice but to do as she demanded for all the laughter when he did. One does not send a roof mistress barefoot back to her hold. Before the year and a day was done, the sept chiefs of each exchanged spears, and the boy found himself married to her eldest daughter, the daughter's mother still Gaishain to him. He tried to give her to his wife as a gift, but both women claimed he was trying to rob them of honor. He nearly had to take his own wife as Gaishain. It came close to raiding between the two clans again before that toe was discharged. And the Aiel women, all four of them, are just falling over laughing. And Egwene's like, she's thinking in her head, like, I don't understand. I have no idea why that's funny. But she, like, politely laughs. It is kind of funny once you understand it all, I'll be honest. But, yeah. So, Egwene's reaction is the correct one. Yeah. And so Moiraine's like, I've never heard of Aiel surrendering before. And Amis is like, it's not surrender. It's Ji Ito. And so they start talking instead about the dreams. And Owain's like, you summoned me here. And so you knew we were coming and stuff. And, Bear is like, it's hard to tell the future even in Teleran Riod. We didn't even see, like, Mat Cauthon at all in our dreams. And it was even an even chance whether Rand al'Thor would come. If he didn't, the dream said he would certainly die, and the Aiel too. But he has come, and if he survives Rhuidean, at least some of the Aiel will survive. This we know. If you had not come, he would have died. If An Alin had not come, you also would have died. If you do not go through the rings, Aes Sedai, and she cuts off as if something had bit her tongue. And then Egwene thinks to herself, what? Moiraine has to enter Rhuidean? But they change the subject, and Egwene eventually asks, can you teach me dreaming now? And they're like, tonight. You might be Aes Sedai, Egwene Al'Vir, but you must become a pupil again. You can't even go to sleep when you want, or sleep lightly enough to tell what you see before you wake. But when the sun begins to set, I will start to teach you. And you also gather Egwene has been Egwene introduced herself as a full Aes Sedai. She's basically posing as one. She introduced herself as Egwene Al'Vir, Aes Sedai of the Green Ajah, just like they were doing in the Stone of Tyr. And Moiraine didn't, contradict it. Suddenly Moiraine speaks up and stands up and says, I presume I must go as Aviendha did? And then Bear is like, you shouldn't have been told, or Sienna says, you shouldn't have been told, but it's done now. One knot of the blood of the Aiel has gone to Rhuidean, and now another. And Moiraine's like, what if I do not go? And Bear is like, we've told you too much already. Moiraine then says, do not let Lan follow me. He'll try if he sees me. Moiraine quickly removes her dress and is barefoot, and she runs barefoot down the slope to the center of Rhuidean. Amis then turns to Egwene, who obviously it's just Egwene and the four wise ones now, and she's like, Egwene Al'Vir, you must be patient, and you must be a student, and do what you're told now. Above all, you must not enter Teleran Riod until one of us says you may. Will you accept this? And Egwene's like, oh god, this sounds like I'm going to be a novice again. But she says, I can accept this. And then Bear is like, good, then I will tell you about dream walking, and when I'm done you will repeat back to me what I have said. If you fail to touch any point, you will scrub all the pots of the guy in place of the Gaishain tonight. If you can't do it after a second time, well, we'll discuss that when it happens. And then she starts talking about Tel'aran'rhiod, and I'm going to read this. It's one paragraph, but I'm going to read this as, specifically as well, because Tel'aran'rhiod is very important to the overarching story. So she says, "Almost anyone can touch Tel'aran'rhiod, but few can truly enter it. Of all the wise ones, we four alone can dreamwalk, and your tower has not produced a dreamwalker in nearly 500 years. It is not a thing of the power, though I said I believe it is. I cannot channel, nor can Siana, yet we dreamwalk as well as Amis or Melaine. Many people brush the worlds of dreams in their sleep. Because they only brush against it, they wake with aches or pains when they should have broken bones or mortal hurts. A dreamwalker enters the dream fully, therefore her injuries are real on waking. For one who is fully in the dream, death there is death here. To enter the dream too completely, though, is to lose touch with the flesh. There is no way back, and the flesh dies. It is said that once there were those who could enter the dream in the flesh, and no longer be in this world at all. It was an evil thing, for they did evil. It must never be attempted, even if you believe it possible for you, for each time you will lose some part of what makes you human. You must learn to enter Tel'aran'rhiod when you wish, to the degree you wish. You must learn to find what you need, to find and read what you see, to enter the dreams of another close by in order to aid healing, to recognize those who are in the dream fully enough to harm you." And she continues talking as Egwene listens, but that's all they say in the book. And so the chapter ends, and we go into chapter 24, Rhuidean. Alright, you're going to want to, if you need to take a break, take a break. This chapter is big energy here, and it might take a minute. So we go to Rand and Mat. Chapter 24, Rhuidean. So we go to Rand and Mat, and there's a ton of fog. And they are hesitant to enter the fog, but they saw Aviendha run straight through it. So they're like, well, alright, we have to. Rand is like, I have no choice, so I definitely have to. And he steps in, and Mat follows hesitantly. As they step through the fog, they really enter Rhuidean, and it's basically a city. It's not as large as Caemlyn or Tyr, but it has very wide streets and is completely deserted despite the great fountains and statues and splendor. Rand looks at the statues and the fountains and realizes if those are here, there must have been water at some point. And so he starts channeling. And he realizes he can detect water with the one power. And there's an underground lake. And so he basically channels the water up and rises it to the surface, and it comes and makes a pool inside the fountain. And since they weren't allowed to bring drink or food, they drink their fill because they are very thirsty. And Rand's like, okay, I think I can do this in the future if I need now. They go deeper into Rhuidean, into the middle of a plaza, and see a huge, enormous tree and a bunch of random items everywhere in the plaza. Mat's like, those are probably ter'angreal. And Rand stops briefly to look at these two little statues of a man and a woman, each holding a crystal sphere. But he keeps walking anyway, and realizes, oh my god, this tree is Avendesora. Avendesora is the tree of life, and the symbols on the Waygate are leaves of the Avendesora, right? And I don't know when we'll talk about this, and maybe it's already been said, but basically this tree came from a cutting that the Aiel took during the breaking of the world and planted here in Rhuidean, and so this tree is 3,000 years old. And several hundred years earlier, the Aiel went into Karhine on the other side of the mountains and gave a cutting of Avendesora to the king of Karhine, and it was like a prized possession for them until at one point later, the king of Karhine cut down the new sapling to make a throne, and the Aiel consider the Karhine people tree killers, and 4 of their 13 clans crossed over to raid Karhine and kill the king, which they did. And it was a great war between the Aiel and the Karhinen. And eventually, once the Aiel killed their king, they retreated back to the Aiel Waste. So that's kind of the political tension there. But Avendesora is like awesome to see, apparently. And that story also informs their viewpoint of people from where Rand is. The Aiel call the area where Rand is, they call the people from there wetlanders. So people not from the Waste are wetlanders to them. They relax under the tree for a little bit until Rand basically looks up and he sighs and he's like, duty is heavier than a mountain. Death is lighter than a feather, duty heavier than a mountain. And Rand gets up. And Mat's like, what do you think we're going to find in the center? And Rand's like, I think I got to go alone. And Mat's like, what do you mean? I've come this far. And Rand's like, it's not like that, Mat. If you go in there, you either come out a clan chief or die or come out mad. That's it. And Mat hesitates and he thinks to himself, to die and live again. That's what they said in the gate to Terangriel that I went in. Well, I don't want to be a clan chief, and the Aiel would probably stick spears through me anyway. And he's like, we'll leave it to luck then. And he pulls out a coin. He's like, this is getting to be my lucky coin. Flame, I go in with you. Head, I stay out. And he flips it, and it bounces off his hand, clinks to the pavement, bounces twice, and lands on its edge. And he stares at Rand and is like, did you do that on purpose? And Rand's like, no. And the coin falls over, showing the face. And Rand says, it looks like you stay out here. And Mat's like, well, fine. You go in, do what you gotta do, and come back. I want to leave this place, and I'm not going to wait for you. And I'm not coming in after you either, so you best be careful. And Rand starts grinning, and he's like, I wouldn't think that of you, Mat. And Mat's like, well, so long as you understand I'm not coming in. Go be a bloody Aiel clan chief. You got the face for it. And Rand walks away through these glittering columns and seems to vanish. Mat just yells, you leave me alone in the Waste with Moraine and the bloody Aiel and I'll strangle you, Dragon Reborn or no. And I'm not coming in after you if you get in trouble, you hear me? And he thinks to himself, if he's not out of there in an hour, I've gotta... And he's basically implying like he's got to go in and get him anyway. So Mat is basically the kind of guy, if you haven't picked up, where he says one thing because he doesn't want people to know he cares, but in his head he's like, he generally is for his friends and does the right thing, but he just doesn't want people to think that of him for some reason. And so Mat just thinks to himself, I'll give him an hour. And then whether he comes back or no, I'm going to turn around and leave. That's what I'll do. And so he turns around and stares at one of the objects. A large door frame of polished redstone, twisted in a strange way. The exact same as the one under the Stone of Tyr. It seemed. And Mat thinks to himself, light, Terangriel, portal stones, Rhuidean. Well, what difference can one more time make? And he steps through the wall of blinding light. Suddenly he's in a room, a huge chamber with these thick columns and a dull white floor. And he turns back to the Terangriel and hears a voice. A very long time. He turns away and, he turns towards the voice, reaching for his knife, but it's back at the mountainside. He has nothing. And it was a very tall fellow with very white skin, white like paper. His eyes were big and colorless. He had pale red hair and stood up like a bush. He got the impression of a fox about to leap on a cornered chicken. A very long time. Do you abide by the treaties and agreements? Do you carry iron or instruments of music or devices for making light? And Mat just says, I have none of those things. And Mat's thinking to himself, this isn't the same place, but it is the same questions. And he remembers what Moraine said about eating emotion. He's thinking to himself, like, well, you're going through my bloody experiences, huh? Well, let him. Maybe he'll jog some loose so I can remember him too. And he wondered if he was speaking the old tongue again. He couldn't really tell. And he's like, well, if you take me to where I can get a few questions answered, leave the way. If not, I'll be going, and apologies for bothering you. No! You must not go. Come. I will take you where you may find what you need. Come. Come. By the way, this chapter, I'm going to throw this out there right now. This moment for Mat is, in a way, the same impact to his character that Egwene had when she was collared. So I am going to, up here soon, I will be reading words, word for word, but just know, like, this is a very important section. So the man leads Mat away, and Mat's thinking to himself, I will never give up all of my knives again. Holy crap. And he keeps going down a corridor, just following him for ages and ages. And the kind of fox-looking man, like, keeps peeking over his shoulder, making sure Mat's still there. And eventually Mat's like, never think you've caught a babe in your snare. If you try to cheat me, I will have your hide for saddlecloth. And the dude is kind of like, whoa. And his eyes get wide, and then he, like, shrugs and has, like, kind of a mocking smile. And Mat looks at the leather straps along the man's body. They're, like, silver-studded. And he starts wondering about where that very pale leather came from. And he's like, surely not Oolite, I think it is. I think the implication being it might be human skin, by the way. And Mat just says, lead, you son of a goat. Your hide's not worth silver studding. Take me where I want to go. And he thinks to himself, I'll be burned if I let some fox-faced goat brain make a harness out of my hide. And they walk for ages. Long time. And soon enough, there's a 5-sided doorway ahead of him. When he looks behind him, sees, like, nothingness, and then looks in front of him again, it's just there. And he takes a deep breath and walks through. And it's another white-floored, star-shaped chamber, not as big as the first one. And there's an 8-pointed star with a black pedestal on each point. And there's a smell like a wild animal's lair. Mat looked up on the pedestals, and there's no one on them. They were supposed to answer his questions. He's being cheated. If he came here, he should be able to get answers. And he spun in a circle, not looking for the doorway, and it was gone. There was no way out. And then he turned around again, back to the pedestals, and there was someone standing on each one. 4 men, and the rest women. One of the women says, Speak! By the ancient treaty, here's agreement made. What is your need? Speak! Mat hesitated. That was not what the snaky people had said. They were all staring at him like foxes staring at dinner. Mat asks, Who is the daughter of the 9 moons, and why do I have to marry her? And he kind of hoped that they would count that as one question. No one answered. None of them spoke. They just continued to stare at him with those big, pale eyes. You're supposed to answer, he said. But silence. Burn your bones to ash, answer me. Who's the daughter of the 9 moons, and why do I have to marry her? How will I die and live again? What does it mean that I have to give up half the light of the world? Those are my 3 questions. Say something. Dead silence. He could hear himself breathing, hear the blood throbbing in his ears. I have no intention of marrying. I have no intention of dying either, whether I'm supposed to live again or not. I walk around with holes in my memory, holes in my life, and you stare at me like idiots. If I had my way, I'd want those holes filled, but at least answers to my questions might fill in some of my future. You have to answer done, one of the men growled, and Mat blinked. Done? What was done? What did he mean? Burn your eyes, Mat muttered. Burn your souls. You're as bad as Aes Sedai. Well, I want a way to be free of Aes Sedai and the power, and I want to be away from you and back to Rhuidean, if you won't answer me. Open up a door and let me done. And another woman echoes, done. Matt scanned the walls, then glared, turning to take them all in, standing up there on their pedestals, staring down at him. Done? What's done? I see no door, you lying goat-fathered fool! A woman said in a whispered growl, and others repeated it. Fool, fool, fool. Wise to ask leave-taking when you set no price, no terms. Yet fool not to first agree on price. We will set the price. They spoke so quickly he couldn't tell which one of the people said what. What was asked will be given. The price will be paid. Burn you, he shouted. What are you Utter darkness closed around him. There was something around his throat. He couldn't breathe air. He couldn't. And the chapter ends. Chapter 25 is titled The Road to the Spear. Oh man. I do also want to point out that one thing I missed, there was a conversation between the wise ones and, something like that. But anyway, basically you're supposed to know about one of the Aiel prophecies now, which is, he will come from Rhuidean at dawn and tie you together with bonds you cannot break. He will take you back, and he will destroy you. So that is apparently a prophecy by the Aiel. So they think he who comes with the dawn will come from Rhuidean at dawn, tie the Aiel together with bonds they cannot break, take them back, and destroy them as well. And so the Aiel wise ones were like, basically like, he who comes with the dawn will destroy the Aiel, but he will also save us. So it's kind of another one of those confusing prophecies. All right. So that ending of chapter 24 like had me on the edge of my seat, to be honest. Yeah. So chapter 25 is popularly considered to be, by many fans of the series, one of the best chapters in the entire series. Unfortunately, this means I must read it. So it is going to be very long. It is also a 2-part chapter. So this chapter and the next chapter should be consumed with each other. So this recording has already gone on for like 42 and a half minutes. If you are close to needing a break, I would take one now. Yes, on that massive, massive cliffhanger. You have had your chance. So we go back to Rand, and Rand is walking past these rows of columns. The air is cool, and to ahead of him, he can see another man dressed as an Aiel, stiff as a statue in the changing lights of these weird glittering pillars. He realizes that must be Muradin, that man Couladin's brother. He was very stiff. Something was clearly happening to him. But Rand could see the Aiel man's eyes clearly. They were wide and staring. His face was tight, mouth quivering on the brink of a snarl. Whatever he was seeing, he did not like it. But Muradin had survived that far at least, and if he could do it, Rand could. The man was 6 or 7 paces ahead of him at best, and he wondered why he and Matt had not seen Muradin go in. Rand took a step into the columns. So the rest of this chapter is possibly confusing, but you need to put it together like a mystery, something like that. But I'll talk about it at the end. But do your best to try to understand exactly what's happening here, because it is a massive revelation. And I'm just going to read. So after Rand took his step, he rode behind a set of eyes, feeling but not controlling a body. The owner of those eyes crouched easily among boulders on a barren mountainside, beneath a sun-blasted sky, peering down at strange, half-made stone structures. No, less than half-made. That's Rhuidean, but without any fog, and only just begun, peering down contemptuously. He was Mandine, young for a sept chief at 40. Separateness faded. Acceptance came. He was Mandine. You must agree, Sealdra said, but for the moment he ignored her. The Djen had made things to draw up water and spill it into great stone basins. He had fought battles over less water than one of those tanks held, with people walking by as though water was of no consequence. A strange forest of glass rose in the center of all their activity, glittering in the sun, and near it the tallest tree he had ever seen, at least 3 spans high. Their stone structures looked as if each was meant to contain an entire hold, an entire sept when done. Madness! This Rhuidean could not be defended. Not that anyone would attack the Djen, of course. Most avoided the Djen as they avoided the accursed lost ones, who wandered searching for the songs they claimed would bring back lost days. A procession snaked out of Rhuidean toward the mountain. A few dozen Djen and 2 palanquins, each carried by 8 men. There was enough wood in each of those palanquins for a dozen chief chairs. He had heard there were still Aes Sedai among the Djen. You must agree to whatever they ask, husband, Sealdra said. He looked at her then, wanting for a moment to run his hands through her long golden hair, seeing the laughing girl who had laid the bridal wreath at his feet and asked him to marry her. She was serious now, though, intent and worried. Will the others come? He asked. Some. Most. I've talked to my sisters in the dream, and we have all dreamed the same dream. The chiefs who do not come, and those who do not agree. Their septs will die, Mandyne. Within 3 generations they will be dust, and their holds and cattle belong to other septs. Their names will be lost. He did not like her talking to the wise ones of other septs, even in dreams. But the wise ones dreamed true. When they knew, it was true. Stay here, he told her. If I do not return, help our sons and daughters to hold the sept together. She touched his cheek. I will, shade of my life. But remember, you must agree. Mandyne motioned, and 100 veiled shapes followed him down the slope, ghosting from boulder to boulder, bows and spears ready, grays and browns blending with the barren land, vanishing even to his eyes. They were all men, and he had left all the women of the sept who carried the spear with the men around Sealdra. If anything went wrong and she decided on something senseless to save him, the men would probably follow her in it. The woman would see her back to the hold whatever she wanted, to protect the hold and the sept. He hoped they would. Sometimes they could be fiercer than any man, and more foolish. The procession from Rhuidean had stopped on the cracked clay flat by the time he reached the lower slope. He motioned his men to ground and went on alone, lowering his veil. He was aware of other men moving out from the mountain to his left and right, coming across the baked grounds from other directions. How many? 50? Maybe 100? Some faces he had expected to see were missing. Sealdra was right as usual. Some had not listened to their wise one's dream. There were faces he had never seen before, and faces of men he had tried to kill, men who have tried to kill him. At least none were veiled. Killing in front of a Djen was almost as bad as killing a Djen. He hoped the others remembered that. Treachery from one, and the veils would be donned. The warriors each chief had brought would come down from the mountains, and this dry clay would be muddied with blood. He half expected to feel a spear through his ribs any moment. Even trying to watch 100 possible sources of death, it was hard not to stare at the Aes Sedai as the bearers lowered their ornately carved chairs to the ground. Women with hair so white it almost seemed transparent. Ageless faces with skin that looked as if the wind might tear it. He had heard the years did not touch Aes Sedai. How old must those 2 be? What had they seen? Could they remember when his great father Kamran first found Ogier steading in the Dragon Wall and began to trade with them? Or maybe even when Kamran's great father Rodrik led the Aiel to kill the men in iron shirts who had crossed the Dragon Wall? The Aes Sedai turned their eyes on him, sharp blue and dark brown, the first dark eyes he had ever seen, and seemed to see inside his skull his thoughts. He knew himself chosen out, and did not know why. With an effort, he pulled away from those twin gazes which knew him better than he knew himself. A gaunt, white-haired man, tall if stooped, came forward from the Gen, flanked by two graying women who might have been sisters, with the same deep-set green eyes and the same way of tilting their heads when they looked at anything. The rest of the Gen stared uneasily at the earth rather than at the Aiel, but not these three. "I am Derman," the man said in a deep, strong voice, his blue-eyed scrutiny as steady as any Aiel's. "These are Mordain and Nerys." He gestured to the woman beside him in turn. "We speak for Rhuidean and the Gen Aiel." A stir ran through the men around Mandine. Most of them liked the Gen claiming to be Aiel no better than he did. "Why have you called us here?" he demanded, though it burned his tongue to admit being summoned. Instead of answering, Derman said, "Why do you not carry a sword?" That brought angry mutters. "It is forbidden," Mandine growled. "Even Gen should know that." He lifted his spears, touched the knife at his waist, the bow on his back. "These are weapons enough for a warrior." The mutters became approving, including some from men who had sworn to kill him. They still would, given the chance, but they approved of what he had said. And they seemed content to let him talk with those Aes Sedai watching. "You do not know why," Mordain said, and Nerys added, "There is too much you do not know, yet you must know." "What do you want?" Mandine demanded. "You!" Derman ran his eyes across the Aiel, making that one word fit them all. "Whoever would lead among you must come to Rhuidean and learn where we came from and why you do not carry swords. Who cannot learn will not live." "Your wise ones have spoken to you," Mordain said, "or you would not be here. You know the cost to those who refuse." Sharendon pushed his way to the front, alternating glaring at Mandine and the Gen. Mandine had put that long, puckered scar down his face. They had nearly killed each other 3 times. "Just come to you?" Sharendon said. "Whichever of us comes to you will lead the Aiel?" "No." The word came thin as a whisper, but strong enough to fill every ear. It came from the dark-eyed Aes Sedai, sitting in her carved chair with a blanket across her legs, as if she felt cold under the broiling sun. "That one will come later. The stone that never falls will fall to announce his coming. Of the blood, but not raised by the blood, he will come from Rhuidean at dawn to tie you together with bonds you cannot break. He will take you back, and he will destroy you." Some of the Sept chiefs moved as if to leave, but none took more than a few steps. Each had listened to the wise ones of his Sept. "Agree, or we will be destroyed as if we never were. Agree, or we will destroy ourselves." "This is some trick!" Sharendon shouted. Under Aes Sedai's stares he lowered his voice, but it held anger yet. "You mean to gain control of the Septs. Aiel bend knee to no man or woman." He jerked his head, avoiding Aes Sedai eyes. "To no one," he muttered. "We seek no control," Nerys told them. "Our days dwindle. A day will come when the Gen are no more, and only you will remain to remember the Aiel. You must remain, or all is for nothing and lost." The flatness of her voice, the calm sureness, silenced Sharendon. But Mandine had one more question. "Why? If you know your doom, why do this?" He gestured towards the structures rising in the distance. "It is our purpose," Derman replied calmly. "For long years we searched for this place, and now we prepare it, if not for the purpose we once thought. We do what we must, and keep faith." Mandine studied the man's face. There was no fear in it. "You are Aiel," he said, and when some of the other clan chiefs gasped, he raised his voice. "I will go to the Gen Aiel." "You may not come to Rhuidean armed," Derman said. Mandine laughed aloud at the temerity of the man, asking an Aiel to go unarmed. Shedding his weapons, he stepped forward. "Take me to Rhuidean, Aiel. I will match your courage." Rand blinked in the flickering lights. He had been Mandine. He could still feel contempt for the Gen fading into admiration. Were they Gen Aiel or were they not? They had looked the same, tall, with light-colored eyes and sun-darkened faces, dressed in the same clothes except for lacking veils, but there had not been a weapon among them save for simple belt knives suitable for work. There was no such thing as an Aiel without weapons. He was further into the columns than a single step could account for, and closer to Muradin than he had been. The Aiel's fixed stare had become a dire frown. Gritty dust crunched under Rand's boots as he stepped forward. His name was Roderick, and he was nearly 20. The sun was a golden blister in the sky, but he kept his veil up and his eyes alert. His spears were ready, one in his right hand, 3 held with small bull-hide buckler, and he was ready. Jordam was down on the brown grass flat to the south of the hills, where most of the bushes were puny and withered. The old man's hair was white, like that thing called snow the old ones talked of, but his eyes were sharp, and watching the well-diggers haul up filled water bags would not occupy all his attention. Mountains rose to the north and east, the northern range tall and sharp as in white-tipped, but dwarfed by eastern mountains. Those looked as if the world was trying to touch the heavens, and perhaps did. Maybe that white was snow? He would not find out. Faced with this, the Gen must decide to turn east. They had trailed north along that mountainous wall for long months, painfully dragging their wagons behind them, trying to deny the Aiel that followed them. At least there had been water when they crossed a river, even if not much. It had been years since Roderick had seen a river he could not wade across. Most were only cracked, dry clay away from the mountains. He hoped the rains would come again and make things green once more. He remembered when the world was green. He heard the horses before he saw them, 3 men riding across the brown hills in long leather shirts sewn all over with metal discs, 2 with lances. He knew the one in the lead, Garam, son of the chief of the town, just out of sight back the way they came, and not much older than himself. They were blind, these townsmen. They did not see the Aiel who stirred after they passed, then settled back to near invisibility in the Sri land. Roderick lowered his veil. There would be no killing unless the riders began it. He did not regret it, not exactly, but he could not make himself trust men who lived in towns and houses. There had been too many battles with that kind. The stories said it had always been so. Garam drew rein, raising his right hand in salute. He was a slight, dark-eyed man like his 2 followers, but all 3 looked tough and competent. "Ho, Roderick! Have your people finished filling their water-skins yet?" "I see you, Garam." He kept his voice level and expressionless. It made him uneasy seeing men on horses, even more so than carrying swords. The Aiel had pack animals, but there was something unnatural about sitting atop a horse. A man's legs were good enough. "We are close. Does your father withdraw his permission for us to take water on his lands?" No other town had ever given permission before. Water had to be fought for if men were near, just like everything else, and if there was water, then men were near. It would not be easy to take these 3 by himself. He shifted his feet in readiness to dance, and likely die. "He does not," Garam said. He had not even noticed Roderick's shift. "We have a strong spring in the town, and my father says that when you go, we will have new wells you have dug until we go ourselves. But your grandfather seemed to want to know if others have started to move, and they have." He leaned an elbow on the front of his saddle. "Tell me, Roderick, are they truly the same people as yourselves?" "They are the Gen Aiel, we the Aiel. We are the same, yet not. I cannot explain it further, Garam." He really didn't understand it himself. "Which way do they move?" Jordam asked. Roderick bowed to his great-father calmly. He had heard a footfall, the sound of a soft boot, and had known it for an Aiel's. The townsmen had not noticed Jordam's approach, though, and they jerked their reins in surprise. Only Garam's outflung hand stopped the other two from lowering their lances. Roderick and his grandfather waited. "East," Garam said when he had his horse under control again. "Across the spine of the world." He gestured to the mountains that stabbed the sky. Roderick winced, but Jordam said coolly, "What lies on the other side?" "The end of the world, for all I know," Garam replied. "I'm not sure there is a way across." He hesitated. "The Jinn have Aes Sedai with them. Dozens, I've heard. Does it not make you uneasy, traveling close to Aes Sedai? I have heard the world was different once, but they destroyed it." The Aes Sedai made Roderick very nervous, though he kept his face blank. They were only 4, not dozens, but enough to make him remember stories that the Aiel had failed the Aes Sedai in some way that no one knew. The Aes Sedai must know. They had seldom left the Jenn's wagons in the year since their arrival, but when they did, they looked at the Aiel with sad eyes. Roderick was not the only one who tried to avoid them. "We guard the Jenn," Jordam said. "It is they who travel with Aes Sedai." Garam nodded as if that made a difference, then leaned forward again, lowering his voice. "My father has an Aes Sedai advisor, though he tries to keep it from the town. She says we must leave these hills and move east. She says the rivers will run again, and we will build a great city beside one. She says many things. I hear the Aes Sedai plan to build a city. They found Ogier to build it for them." "Ogier!" He shook his head, pulling himself from legends back to reality. "Do you think they mean to rule the world once more, the Aes Sedai? I think we should kill them before they can destroy us again." "You must do as you think best." Jordam's voice gave no hint of his own thoughts. "I must ready my people to cross those mountains." The dark-haired man straightened in his saddle, plainly disappointed. Roderick suspected he had wanted Aiel help in killing Aes Sedai. "The spine of the world," Garam said brusquely. "It is another name. Some call it Dragon Wall." "A fitting name," Jordam replied. Roderick stared at the towering mountains in the distance. A fitting name for Aiel. Their own secret name, told to no one, was People of the Dragon. He did not know why, only that it was not spoken aloud except when you received your spears. What lay beyond this dragon wall? At least there would be people to fight. There always were. In the whole world there were only Aiel, Jenn, and enemies. Only that. Aiel, Jenn, and enemies. Rand drew a deep breath that rasped as if he had not breathed for hours. Eye-splitting rings of light ran up the columns around him. The words still echoed in his mind. Aiel, Jenn, and enemies. That was the world. They had not been in the waste, certainly. He had seen, lived, a time before the Aiel came to their threefold land. He was nearer still to Muradin. The Aiel's eyes shifted uneasily, and he seemed to struggle against taking another step. Rand moved forward. Squatting easily on the white-cloaked hillside, Jordam ignored the cold as he watched 5 people tramp towards him. 3 cloaked men, 2 women in bulky dresses, making hard work of the snow. Winter should have been long over since, according to the old ones, but then they told stories of seasons changing from what they had always been. They claimed the earth used to shake too, and mountains rose or sank like the water in a summer pond when you threw a rock in. Jordam did not believe it. He was 18, born in the tents, and this was the only life he had ever known. The snow, the tents, and the duty to protect. He lowered his veil and stood slowly, leaning on his long spear so as not to frighten the wagon folk. But they stopped abruptly anyway, staring at the spear, at the bow slung across his back and the quiver at his waist. None appeared any older than himself. "You have need of us, Jenn?" he called. "You name us that to mock us," a tall, sharp-nosed fellow shouted back. "But it is true. We are the only true Aiel. You have given up the way." "That is a lie," Jordam snapped. "I have never held a sword." He drew a deep breath to calm himself. He had not been put out here to grow angry with Jen. "If you are lost, your wagons are that way." He pointed southward with his spear. One woman placed a hand on Sharp-Nose's arm and spoke quietly. The others nodded, and finally Sharp-Nose did too, if reluctantly. She was pretty, with yellow wisps of hair escaping the dark shawl wrapped around her head. Facing Giordam, she said, "We are not lost." She peered at him suddenly, seeming to see him for the first time, and tightened the shawl around her. He nodded. He had not thought they were. The Jen usually managed to avoid anyone from the tents, even when they needed help. The few who did not came only in desperation, for the help they could not find elsewhere. "Follow me." It was a mile across the hills to his father's tents, low shapes partially covered by the last snowfall, clinging to the slopes. His own people watched the new arrivals cautiously, but did not stop what they were doing, whether cooking or tending weapons or tossing snowballs with a child. He was proud of his sept. Nearly 200 people, largest of the 10 camps scattered north of the wagons. The Jen didn't seem much impressed, though. It irritated him that there were so many more Jen than Aiel. Lewin came out of his tent, a tall, graying man with a hard face. Lewin never smiled, they said, and Giordam had certainly never seen it. Maybe he had before Giordam's mother died of a fever, but Giordam did not believe it. The yellow-haired woman, her name was Morin, told a story much as Giordam had expected. The Jen had traded with a village, a place with a log wall, and then men from the village had come in the night, taking back what had been traded for, taking more. The Jen always thought they could trust people who lived in houses, always thought the way would protect them. The dead were listed, fathers, a mother, first brothers. The captives, first sisters, a sister mother, a daughter. That last surprised Giordam. It was Morin who spoke bitterly of a 5-year-old daughter carried off to be raised by some other woman. Studying her more closely, he mentally added a few years to her age. "We will bring them back," Lewin promised. He took a bundle of spears handed to him and thrust them point down into the ground. "You may stay with us if you wish, so long as you're willing to defend yourself and the rest of us. If you stay, you will never be allowed back among the wagons." The sharp-nosed fellow turned at that and hurried back the way they had come. Lewin went on. It was seldom that only one left at this point. "Those who wish to come with us to this village, take a spear. But remember, if you take a spear to use against men, you will have to stay with us." His voice and eyes were stone. "You will be dead as far as the Jen are concerned." One of the remaining men hesitated, but each finally pulled a spear from the ground. So did Morin. Giordam gaped at her, and even Lewin blinked. "You do not have to take a spear just to stay," Lewin told her, "or for us to bring back your people. Taking the spear means a willingness to fight, not just to defend yourself. You can put it down. There is no shame." "They have my daughter," Morin said. To Giordam's shock, Lewin barely paused before nodding. "There is a first for all things. For all things. So be it." He began tapping men on the shoulder, walking through the camp, naming them to visit this log-walled village. Giordam was the first tapped. His father had always chosen him first since the day he was old enough to carry a spear. He would have had it no other way. Morin was having problems with the spear, the haft tangling in her long skirts. "You do not have to go," Giordam told her. "No woman ever has before. We will bring your daughter to you." "I mean to bring Kieran out of there myself," she said fiercely. "You will not stop me." A stubborn woman. "In that case, you must dress like this," he gestured to his own gray-brown coat and breeches. "You cannot walk cross-country in the night in a dress." He took the spear away from her before she could react. The spear is not easily learned. The two men who had come with her, awkwardly receiving instruction and nearly falling over their own feet, were proof of that. He found a hatchet and chopped a pace from the spear shaft, leaving 4 feet, counting nearly a foot of steel point. "Stab with it." "No more than that, just stab. The haft is used for blocking too, but I will find you something to use as a shield in your other hand." She looked at him strangely. "How old are you?" she asked, even more oddly. He told her, and she only nodded thoughtfully. After a moment, he said, "Is one of those men your husband?" They were still tripping over their spears. "My husband mourns Kirin already. He cares more for the trees than his own daughter." "The trees?" "The trees of life." When he still looked at her blankly, she shook her head. "3 little trees planted in barrels. They care for them almost as well as they do for themselves. When they find a place of safety, they mean to plant them. They say the old days will return then. I say they. Very well, I am not Jen any more." She hefted the shortened spear. "This is my husband now." Eyeing him closely, she asked, "If someone stole your child, would you talk of the way of the leaf and suffering sent to test us?" He shook his head, and she said, "I thought not. You will make a fine father. Teach me to use this spear." An odd woman, but pretty. He took the spear back and began to show her, working out what he was doing while he did. With the short haft, it was quick and agile. Morin was watching him with that strange smile, but the spear had caught him up. "I saw your face in the dream," she said softly, but he did not really hear. With a spear like this, he could be quicker than a man with a sword. In his mind's eye, he could see the Aiel defeating all the men with swords. No one would stand against them. No one. Lights flashed through the glass columns, half-blinding Rand. Muradin was only a pace or two ahead, staring straight in front of him, teeth bared, snarling silently. The columns were taking them back into the time-lost history of the Aiel. Rand's feet moved of their own accord, forward and back in time. Luwin adjusted the dust veil across his face and peered down into the small camp where the coals of a dying fire still glowed beneath an iron cookpot. The wind brought him a smell of half-burned stew. Mounds of blankets surrounded the coals in the moonlight. There were no horses in sight. He wished that he had brought some water, but only the children were allowed water except with meals. He vaguely remembered a time when there had been more water, when the days were not so hot and dusty and the wind had not blown all the time. Night was only a small relief, trading a dull, fiery red sun for cold. He wrapped himself tighter in the cape of wild goat skins he used for a blanket. His companion scrambled closer, bundled as he was, kicking rocks and muttering until he was sure they would wake the men below. He did not complain. He was no more used to this than they. Dust veils hid their face, but he could make out who was who. Luca, with his shoulders half again as wide as anyone else's. He liked to play tricks. Geran, lanky as a stork and the best runner among the wagons. Charlin and Alijah, alike as reflections except for Charlin's habit of tilting his head when he was worried, as he was now. Their sister, Colleen, was down in the camp. And Migran, Luwin's sister. When the girls' gathering bags were found on ground torn by a struggle, everyone else was ready to mourn and go on as they had done so many times before, even Luwin's grandfather. If Adan had known what the 5 of them planned, he would have stopped them. All Adan did now was mutter about keeping faith with the Aes Sedai Luwin had never seen, that and try to keep the Aiel alive. The Aiel as a people, but not any one given Aiel, not even Migran. "They are 4, Luwin whispered. "The girls are this side of the fire. I will wake them, quietly, and we will sneak them away while the men sleep." His friends looked at each other, nodded. He supposed they should have made a plan before this, but all they had been able to think of was coming to get the girls, and how to leave the wagons without being seen. He had not been certain they could follow these men, or find them before they reached the village they came from. A collection of rough huts where the Aiel had been driven away with stones and sticks. There would be nothing to be done if the takers got that far. "What if they do wake?" Geran asked. "I will not leave Colleen," Charlin snapped, right on top of his brother's quieter. "We're taking them back, Geran." "We are," Luwin agreed. Luca poked Geran's ribs, and Geran nodded. Making their way down in the darkness was no easy task. Drought-dried twigs snapped under their feet. Rocks and pebbles showered down the dry slopes ahead of them. The harder Lewin tried to move silently, the more noise he seemed to make. Luca fell into a thorn brush that cracked loudly, but managed to extract himself with no more than heavy breathing. Charlin slipped and slid halfway to the bottom, but nothing moved below. Short of the camp, Lewin paused, exchanging anxious looks with his friends, then tiptoed in. His own breath sounded thunderous in his ears, as loud as the snores coming from one of the 4 large mounds. He froze as the rough snorts stopped and one of the mounds heaved. It settled, the snoring began again, and Lewin let himself breathe. Carefully, he crouched beside one of the smaller heaps and flipped aside a rough woolen blanket stiff with dirt. Migran stared up at him, face bruised and swollen, her dress torn to little better than rags. He clapped a hand over her to keep her from crying out, but she only continued to stare blankly, not even blinking. "I am going to carve you like a pig, boy." One of the larger mounds tumbled aside, and a wild, bearded man in filthy clothes got to his feet, the long knife in his hand glittering dully in the moonlight, picking up the red glow of the coals. He kicked the mounds to either side of him, producing grunts and stirrings. "Just like a pig. Can you squeal, boy, or do you people just run?" "Run," Lewin said, but his sister only stared dully. Frantic, he seized her shoulders, pulled to try starting her toward where the others were waiting. "Run!" She came out of the blanket stiffly, almost a dead weight. Colleen was awake. He could hear her whimpering, but she seemed to be drawing her dirty blankets around her even more tightly, trying to hide in them. Migran stood there, staring at nothing, seeing nothing. "Seems you cannot even do that." Grinning, the man was coming around the fire, his knife held low. The others were sitting up in their blankets now, laughing, watching the fun. Lewin did not know what to do. He could not leave his sister. All he could do was die. Maybe that would give Migran a chance to run. "Run, Migran! Please run!" She did not move. She did not even seem to hear him. What had they done to her? The bearded man came closer, taking his time, chuckling, enjoying his slow advance. "No!" Charlin came hurtling out of the night, throwing his arms around the man with the knife, carrying him to the ground. The other men bounded to their feet. One, his head shaved and shining in the pale light, raised a sword to slash at Charlin. Lewin was not sure exactly how it happened. Somehow, he had the heavy kettle by its iron handle, swinging it. Swinging, it struck the shaved head with a loud crunch. The man collapsed as if his bones had melted. Off balance, Lewin stumbled trying to avoid the fire and fell beside it, losing the cookpot. A dark man with his hair in braids lifted another sword, ready to skewer him. He scrambled away on his back like a spider, eyes on the sword's sharp point, hands searching frenziedly for something to fend the man off, a stick, anything. His palm fell on rounded wood. He jerked it around, pushed it at the snarling man. The man's dark eyes widened. The sword dropped from his grasp. Blood poured from his mouth. Not a stick, a spear. Lewin's hand sprang away from the haft as soon as he realized what it was. Too late. He crawled backward to avoid the man as he fell, stared at him, trembling. A dead man. A man he had killed. The wind felt very cold. After a time, it came to him to wonder why one of the others had not killed him. He was surprised to see the rest of his friends there around the coals. Giran and Luca and Agila, all panting and wild-eyed above their dust veils. Colleen still emitted soft sniveling sobs from beneath her blankets, and Migran still stood staring. Charlin was huddled on his knees holding himself, and the 4 men, the villagers. Lewin stared from one motionless bloody shape to another. "We killed them." Luca's voice shook. "We... Mercy of the light be with us now." Lewin crawled to Charlin and touched his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Charlin fell over. Red wetness slicked his hands, gripping the hilt of the knife driven into his belly. "It hurts, Lewin," he whispered, and shuddered once, and the light went out of his eyes. "What are we going to do?" Giran asked. "Sharlan is dead, and we... Light, what have we done? What do we do?" "We will take the girls back to the wagon." Lewin could not pull his eyes away from Sharlan's glazed stare. "We will do that." They gathered up everything that was useful, the cook pot and the knives mainly. Metal things were hard to come by. "We might as well," Elijah said roughly. "They certainly stole it from someone just like us." When Elijah started to pick up one of the swords, though, Lewin stopped him. "No, Elijah. That is a weapon made to kill people. It has no other use." Elijah said nothing, only ran his eyes over the 4 dead bodies, looked at the spears Luca was winding with blankets to carry Sharlan's body on. Lewin refused to look back at the villagers. "A spear can put food in the pots, Elijah. A sword cannot. It is forbidden by the way." Elijah was still silent, but Lewin thought he sneered behind his dust veil. Yet when they finally started away into the night, the swords remained by the dying coals and the dead men. It was a long walk back through the darkness, carrying the makeshift stretcher bearing Sharlan, the wind sometimes gusting to raise choking clouds of dust. My Gran stumbled along, staring straight ahead. She did not know where she was or who they were. Colleen seemed half terrified, even of her own brother, jumping if anyone touched her. This was not how Lewin had imagined their return. In his mind, the girls had been laughing, happy to return to the wagons. They had all been laughing, not carrying Sharlan's corpse, not hushed by the memory of what they had done. The light of the cook fires came into view, and then the wagons, harnesses already spread for men to take their place at sunrise. No one left the shelter of the wagons after dark, so it surprised Lewin to see 3 shapes come hurrying towards them. Adan's white hair stood out in the night. The other 2 were Nareen, Colin's mother, and Saralyn, his and Migran's. Lewin lowered his dust veil with foreboding. The women rushed to their daughters with comforting arms and soft murmurs. Colleen sank into her mother's embrace with a welcoming sigh. My Gran hardly appeared to notice Saralyn, who looked close to tears at the bruises on her daughter's face. Adan frowned at the young men, permanent creases of worry deepening in his face. "In the name of the light, what happened? When we found you were gone, too." He trailed off when he saw the stretcher holding Sharlan. "What happened?" he asked again, as if dreading the answer. Lewin opened his mouth slowly, but Migran spoke first. "They killed them." She was staring at something in the distance, her voice as simple as a child's. "The bad men hurt us. Then Lewin came and killed them." "You must not say things like that, child," Saralyn said soothingly. She stopped, peering into her daughter's eyes, then turned to stare uncertainly at Lewin. Is it true?" "We had to," Elijah said in a pained voice. "They tried to kill us. They did kill Sharlan." Adan stepped back. "You killed? Killed men? What of the Covenant? We harm no one. No one. There is no reason good enough to justify killing another human being. None." "They took Migran, Great Father," Lewin said. "They took Migran and Colleen and hurt them. There is no reason," Adan roared, shaking with rage. "We must accept what comes. Our sufferings are sent to test our faithfulness. We accept and endure. We do not murder. You have not strayed from the way. You have abandoned it. You are Daishane no longer. You are corrupt, and I will not have the Aiel corrupted by you. Leave us, strangers, killers. You are not welcome in the wagons of the Aiel." He turned his back and strode away as if they no longer existed. Saralyn and Nareen started after him, guiding the girls. "Mother," Luin said, and flinched when she looked back at him with cold eyes. "Mother, please." "Who are you to address me so? Hide your face from me, stranger. I had a son once with a face like that. I do not wish to see it on a killer." And she led my Gran after the others. "I am still Aiel," Luin shouted, but they did not look back. He thought he heard Luca crying. The wind rose, picking up dust, and he veiled his face. "I am Aiel." Wildly darting lights bored into Rand's eyes. The pain of Luin's loss still clung to him, and his mind tumbled furiously. Luin had not carried a weapon. He had not known how to use a weapon. Killing terrified him. It didn't make sense. He was almost abreast of Muradin now, but the man was not aware of him. Muradin's snarl was a rictus. Sweat beaded on his face. He quivered as though wanting to run. Rand's feet took him forward and back. All right, wife. Chapter 26. The Dedicated. Forward and back. Adan lay in the sandy hollow, clutching his dead son's weeping children, shielding their eyes against his ragged cloak. Tears rolled down his face, too, but silently, as he peered cautiously over the edge. At 5 and 6, my Gran and Luin deserved the right to cry. Adan was surprised he had any tears left himself. Some of the wagons were burning. The dead lay where they had fallen. The horses had already been driven off, except for those still hitched to a few wagons that had been emptied onto the ground. For once, he took no notice of the crated things the Aes Sedai had given into Aiel charge, toppled carelessly into the dirt. It was not the first time he had seen that, or dead Aiel, but this time he could not care. The men with the swords and spears and bows, the men who had done the killing, were loading those empty wagons with women. He watched Rhea, his daughter, shoved up into a wagon box with the others, crowded together like animals by laughing killers, the last of his children. Elwyn dead of hunger at 10, Sorel at 20 of fever her dreams told her was coming, and Jaren, who threw himself off a cliff a year ago at 19 when he found he could channel. Marind this morning. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rush out there and stop them from taking his last child. Stop them somehow. And if he did rush out, they would kill him and take Rhea anyway. They might well kill the children, too. Some of those bodies sprawled in their own blood were small. My Gran clutched at him as if she sensed he might leave her, and Luin stiffened as if he wanted to hold tighter, but thought himself too old. Adan smoothed their hair and kept their faces pressed against his chest. He made himself watch, though, until the wagons wheeled away, surrounded by whooping riders after the horses that were already almost out of sight toward the smoking mountains that lined the horizon. Only then did he stand up, prying the children loose. "Wait here for me," he told them. "Wait until I come back." Clinging to each other, they stared at him with tear-stained white faces, nodded uncertainly. He walked out to one of the bodies, rolled her over gently. Sidre could have been asleep, her face just the way it appeared beside him when he woke each morning. It always surprised him to notice gray in her red-gold hair. She was his love, his life, and ever young and new to him. He tried not to look at the blood soaking the front of her dress, or the gaping wound below her breasts. "What do you mean to do now, Adan? Tell us that. What?" He brushed Sidre's hair from her face. She liked to be neat. And he stood, turning slowly to confront the knot of angry, frightened men. Selwyn was the leader, a tall man with deep-set eyes. He had let his hair grow, Selwyn had, as if to hide being Aiel. A number of men had. It made no difference to these last raiders or those who came before. "I mean to bury our dead and go on, Selwyn." His eyes drifted back to Sidre. "What else is there?" "Go on, Adan. How can we go on? There are no horses. There is almost no water, no food. All we have left are wagons full of things the Aes Sedai will never come for. What are they, Adan? What are they that we should give our lives to haul them across the world, afraid to touch them even? We cannot go on as before." "We can!" Adan shouted. "We will! We have legs, we have backs. We will drag the wagons, if need be. We will be faithful to our duty." He was startled to see his own brandished fist. A fist. His hand trembled as he unclenched it and put it down by his side. Selwyn stepped back, then held his ground with his companions. "No, Adan. We are supposed to find a place of safety, and some of us mean to do that. My great father used to tell me stories he heard as a boy, stories of when we lived in safety and people came to hear us sing. We mean to find a place where we can be safe and sing again." "Sing?" Adan scoffed. "I have heard those old stories too, that Aiel singing was a wondrous thing, but you know those old songs no more than I do. The songs are gone, and the old days are gone. We will not give up our duty to the Aes Sedai, to chase after what is lost forever." "Some of us will, Adan." The others behind Selwyn nodded. "We mean to find that safe place, and the songs too. We will!" A crash whipped Adan's head around. More of Selwyn's cronies were unloading one of the wagons, and a large flat crate had fallen, half breaking open to reveal what looked like a polished doorframe of dark red stone. Other wagons were being emptied too, and by more than Selwyn's friends. At least a quarter of the people he saw were hard at work clearing wagons of everything but food or water. "Do not try to stop us," Selwyn cautioned. Adan made his fist loosen again. "You are not Aiel," he said. "You betray everything. Whatever you are no longer Aiel." "We keep the way of the leaf as well as you, Adan." "Go!" Adan shouted. "Go! You are not Aiel. You are lost. Lost! I do not want to look at you. Go!" Selwyn and the others stumbled in their haste to get away from him. His heart sank lower as he surveyed the wagons and the dead lying among the litter. So many dead, so many wounded, moaning as they were tended. Selwyn and his lost ones were taking some care in their unloading. The men with the swords had broken open crates until they realized there was no gold inside, no food. Food was more precious than gold. Adan studied the stone doorframe, tumbled piles of stone figurines, odd shapes and crystals standing among the potted Korra cuttings Selwyn's folk had no use for. Was there a use for any of it? Was this what they were being faithful for? If it was, then so be it. Some could be saved. There was no way to tell what Aes Sedai might consider most important, but some could be saved. He saw Migron and Luin clutching their mother's skirts. He was glad Saralyn was alive to look after them. His last son, her husband, the children's father, had died from the very first arrow that morning. Some could be saved. He would save the Aiel, whatever it took. Kneeling, he gathered Sidre in his arms. "We are still faithful, Aes Sedai," he whispered. "How long must we be faithful?" Putting his head down on his wife's breast, he wept. Tears stung Rand's eyes. Silently, he mouthed Sidre. The way of the leaf? That was no Aiel belief. He could not think clearly. He could hardly think at all. The light spun faster and faster. Beside him, Muradin's mouth was open in a soundless howl. The Aiel's eyes bulged as if witnessing the death of everything. They stepped forward together. Jonai stood at the edge of the cliff, staring out westward over the sun-sparkled water. 100 leagues in that direction lay Comel. Had laid Comel. Comel had clung to the mountains overlooking the sea, 100 leagues west where the sea now ran. If Alnora were still alive, perhaps it would have been easier to take. Without her dreams, he scarcely knew where to go or what to do. Without her, he hardly cared to live. He felt every gray hair as he turned to trudge back to the wagons, waiting a mile away. Fewer wagons now, and showing where. Fewer people, too, a handful of thousands where there had been tens. But too many for the remaining wagons. No one rode now save children too small to walk. Adan met him at the first wagon, a tall young man, his blue eyes too wary. Jonai always expected to see Willem if he looked around quick enough, but Willem had been sent away, of course, years ago, when he began to channel no matter how hard he tried to stop. The world had too many men channeling still. They had to send away boys who showed the signs. They had to. But he wished he had his children back. When had Isol died? So little to be laid in a hastily dug hole, wasted with sickness, there was no Aes Sedai to heal. "They are Ogier, father," Adan said excitedly. Jonai suspected his son had always thought his stories of the Ogier were just that, stories. They came from the north. It was a bedraggled band Adan led him to, no more than 50 in number, hollow-cheeked, sad-eyed, tufted ears drooping. He had become accustomed to his own people's drawn faces and worn, patched clothing, but seeing the same on Ogier shocked him. Yet he had people to care for, and duties to discharge for the Aes Sedai. How long since he had seen an Aes Sedai? Just after Elnora died. Too late for Elnora. The woman had healed the sick who still lived, taken some of the sa-angreal, and gone on her way, laughing bitterly when he asked her where there was a place of safety. Her dress had been patched and worn at the hem. He was not sure she had been sane. She claimed one of the Forsaken was only partially trapped, or maybe not at all. Ishmael still touched the world, she said. She had to be as mad as the remaining male Aes Sedai. He pulled his mind back to the Ogier as they stood, unsteady on their great legs. His thoughts wandered too much since Elnora's death. They had bread and bowls in their hands. He was shocked to feel a prick of anger that someone had shared their meager stock of food. How many of his people could eat on what 50 Ogier could consume? No. To share was the way. To give freely. 100 people? 200? "You have Cora cuttings," one of the Ogier said. His thick fingers gently brushed the trefoil leaves of the 2 potted plants tied to the side of a wagon. "Some," Adan said curtly. "They die, but the old folk keep new cuttings before they do." He had no time for trees. He had a people to look after. "How bad is it in the north?" "Bad," an Ogier woman replied. "The blighted lands have grown southward, and there are Myrddraal and Trollocs." "I thought they were all dead." "Not north, then. They could not turn north." "South? The Sea of Jaren lay 10 days south, or did it any longer?" He was tired. So tired. "You have come from the east?" another Ogier asked. He wiped his bowl with a heel of bread and gulped it down. "How is it to the east?" "Bad," Jonai replied. "Perhaps not so bad for you, though. 12 days ago, some people took a third of our horses before we could escape. We had to abandon wagons." That pained him. Wagons left behind, and what was in them. The things Aes Sedai had placed in Aiel charge, abandoned. That it was not the first time only made it worse. "Almost everyone we meet takes things, whatever they want. Perhaps they will not be so with Ogier, though. Perhaps, an Ogier woman said, as if she did not believe it. Jonai was not certain he did either. There was no safe place. Do you know where any of the steading are? Jonai stared at her. No, I do not. But surely you can find the steading. We have run so far, so long, an Ogier back in the huddles said, and another added in a mournful rumble, The land has changed so much. I think we must find a steading soon, or die, the first Ogier woman said. I feel a longing in my bones. We must find a steading. We must. I cannot help you, Jonai said sadly. He felt a tightness in his chest. The land changed beyond knowing, changing still so the plain traveled last year might be mountains this. The blighted lands growing, Myrddraal and Trolloc still alive, people stealing, people with faces like animals, people who did not recognize Daishane or know them. He could barely breathe. The Ogier lost, the Aiel lost, everything lost. The tightness broke in pain, and he sank to his knees, doubled over, clutching his chest. A fist held his heart, squeezing. Adan knelt beside him worriedly. Father, what is it? What is the matter? What can I do? Jonai managed to seize his son's frayed collar and pulled his face close. Take the people south! He had to force the words out between spasms that seemed to be ripping his heart out. Father, you are the one who... Listen! Take them south. Take the Aiel to safety. Keep the Covenant. Guard what the Aes Sedai gave us until they come for it. The way of the leaf. You must. He had tried. Selinda Sedai must understand that. He had tried. Elnora. The name faded, the pain in Rand's chest loosened. No sense. It made no sense. How could these people be Aiel? The columns flashed in blinding pulses. The air stirred, swirling. Beside him, Muradin's mouth stretched wide in an effort to scream. The Aiel clawed at his veil, clawed at his face, leaving deep, bloody scratches. Forward. Jonai hurried down the empty streets, trying not to look at shattered buildings and dead Korra trees. All dead. At least the last of the long-abandoned Jokars had been hauled away. Aftershocks still troubled the ground beneath his feet. He wore his work clothes, his Cayden sore, of course, though the work he had been given was nothing like he had been trained for. He was 63, in the prime of his life, not yet old enough for gray hairs, but he felt a tired man, a tired old man. No one questioned his entering the Hall of the Servants. There was no one in the great columned entrance to question anyone or give greeting. Plenty of people darted about inside, arms filled with papers or boxes, eyes anxious, but none so much as looked at him. There was a feel of panic about them, and it grew by increments every time the ground shook. Distressed, he crossed the anteroom and trotted up the broad stairs. Mud stained the silvery white L-stone. No one could spare time. Perhaps no one cared. There was no need to knock at the door he sought, not one of the great gilded doors to an ingathering hall, but a door plain and unobtrusive. He slipped in quietly, though, and was glad he had. Half a dozen Aes Sedai stood around the long table, arguing, apparently not noticing when the building trembled. They were all women. He shivered, wondering if men would ever stand in a meeting such as this again. When he saw what was on the table, the shiver became a shudder. A crystal sword. Perhaps an object of the power, perhaps only an ornament, he had no way of telling, held down the dragon banner of Luz Theron Kinslayer, spread out like a tablecloth and spilling onto the floor. His heart clenched. What was that doing here? Why had it not been destroyed, and memory of the cursed man as well? "What good is your foretelling," Ocel was almost shouting, "if you cannot tell us when?" Her long black hair swayed as she shook with anger. "The world rests on this! The future! The wheel itself!" Dark-eyed Diandre faced her with more usual calm. "I am not the creator. I can only tell you what I foretell." "Peace, sisters." Solinda was the calmest of them all. Her old-fashioned Strythe gown only a pale blue mist. The sun-red hair falling to her waist was nearly the color of his own. His great-father had served her as a young man, but she looked younger than he. She was Aes Sedai. "The time for contention amongst ourselves is past. Jarek and Haindar will both be here by tomorrow." "Which means we cannot afford mistakes, Solinda. We must know. Is there any chance of—" Jonai stopped listening. They would see him when they were ready. He was not the only one in the room beside the Aes Sedai. Someshta sat against the wall near the door, a great shape seemingly woven of vines and leaves, his head a little above Jonai's even so. A fissure of withered brown and charred black ran up the Nim's face and furrowed the green grass of his hair. And when he looked at Jonai, his hazelnut eyes seemed trouble. When Jonai nodded to him, he fingered the rift and frowned. "Do I know you?" he said softly. "I am your friend," Jonai replied sadly. He had not seen Someshta in years, but he had heard of this. Most of the Nim were dead, he had heard. "You rode me on your shoulders when I was a child, Someshta. Do you remember nothing of it?" "Singing," Someshta said. "Was there singing? So much is gone. The Aes Sedai say some will return. You are a child of the dragon, are you not?" Jonai winced. That name had caused trouble, no less for not being true. But how many citizens now believed the Daishain Aiel had once served the dragon and no other Aes Sedai? I'm going to interrupt the reading here just to point out that this creature, Soneshta, you are meant to understand that this is the Green Man from the first book who died. So I'll get back in now. "Jonai!" He turned at the sound of Solinda's voice, went to one knee as she approached. The others were still arguing, but more quietly. "All is in readiness, Jonai?" she asked. "All, Aes Sedai." "Solinda Sedai." He hesitated and took a deep breath. "Solinda Sedai, some of us wish to remain. We can serve still." "Do you know what happened to the Aiel at Zora?" He nodded and she sighed, reaching out to smooth her short hair. Or his short hair, as if he were a child. "Of course you do. You Daishain have more courage than 10,000 Aiel, linking arms and singing, trying to remind a madman of who they were and who he had been, trying to turn him with their bodies and a song. Jarek Mandoran killed them. He stood there, staring as though at a puzzle, killing them, and they kept closing their lines and singing. I am told he listened to the last Aiel for almost an hour before destroying him. And then Zora burned, one huge flame consuming stone and metal and flesh. There is a sheet of glass where the second greatest city in the world once stood. Many people had time to flee, Aes Sedai. The Daishain earned them time to flee. We are not afraid. Her hand tightened painfully in his hair. The citizens have already fled Paran Disen, Jonai. Besides, the Daishain have yet a part to play, if Diendre could only see far enough to say what. In any case, I mean to save something here, and that something is you." "As you say," he said reluctantly, "we will care for what you have given into our charge until you want them again." "Of course, the things we gave you." She smiled at him and loosened her grip, smoothing his hair once more before folding her hands. "You will carry the things to safety, Jonai. Keep moving, always moving until you find a place of safety where no one can harm you." "As you say, Aes Sedai." "What of Kumin, Jonai? Has he calmed?" He did not know any way but to tell her. He would rather have bitten his tongue out. "My father is hiding somewhere in the city. He tried to talk us into resisting. He would not listen, Aes Sedai. He would not listen. He found an old shock lance somewhere, and..." He could not go on. He expected her to be angry, but her eyes glistened with tears. "Keep the covenant, Jonai. If the Daishain lose everything else, see they keep the Way of the Leaf. Promise me." "Of course, Aes Sedai," he said, shocked. The covenant was the Aiel, and the Aiel were the covenant. To abandon the Way of the Leaf would be to abandon what they were. Kumin was an aberration. He had been strange since he was a boy, it was said, hardly Aiel at all, though no one knew why. "Go now, Jonai. I want you far from Parendisen by tomorrow. And remember, keep moving. Keep the Aiel safe." He bowed where he knelt, but she was already being drawn back into the argument. "Can we trust Kodam and his followers, Solinda?" "We must, Osel. They are young and inexperienced, but barely touched by the taint, and we have no choice." "Then we will do what we must. The sword must wait. Someshta, we have a task for the last of the Nim, if you will do it. We have asked too much of you. Now we must ask more." Jonai bowed his way out formally as the Nim rose, his head brushing the ceiling. Already immersed in their plans, they were not looking at him, but he did them this last honor anyway. He did not think he would ever see them again. He ran from the hall of the servants, all the way out of the city to where the great gathering waited. Thousands of wagons in 10 lines stretching nearly 2 leagues, wagons loaded with food and water barrels, wagons loaded with the crated things the Aes Sedai had given into Aiel charge, Angriel and Sa-Angriel and Ter-Angriel, all the things that had to be kept from the hands of men going mad while they wielded the one power. Once there would have been other ways to carry them. Jokars and jumpers, hoverflies and huge show wings. Now, painfully assembled horses and wagons had to suffice. Among the wagons stood the people, enough to populate a city, but perhaps all the Aiel left alive in the world. 100 came to meet him, men and women, the representatives demanding word of whether the Aes Sedai had granted leave for some to stay. "No," he told them. Some frowned reluctantly, and he added, "We must obey. We are Daishain Aiel, and we obey the Aes Sedai." They dispersed back to their wagons slowly, and he thought he heard Kumin's name mentioned, but he could not let it trouble him. He hurried to his own wagon, at the head of one of the center lines. The horses were all nervous, with the ground shaking at intervals. His sons were already up on the seat, Willem, 15, with the reins, and Adan, 10, beside him, both grinning with nervous excitement. Little Isolde lay playing with a doll on top of the canvas tied over their possessions, and, more importantly, their charges from the Aes Sedai. There was no room for any to ride but the young and the very old. A dozen rooted Korra cuttings in clay pots sat beside the wagon seat, to be planted when they found a place of safety. A foolish thing to carry, perhaps, but no wagon was without its potted cuttings. Something from a time long gone, symbol of a better time to come. People needed hope, and symbols. Elnora waited beside the team, glossy black hair tumbling about her shoulders and reminding him of the first time he saw her as a girl. But worry had etched lines around her eyes now. He managed to smile for her, hiding the worry in his own heart. "All will be well, wife of my heart." She did not answer, and he added, "Have you dreamed?" "Of no time soon," she murmured. "All will be well, all will be well, and all manner of things will be well." Smiling tremulously, she touched his cheek. "With you I know it will be so, husband of my heart." Jonai waved his arms over his head, and the signal rippled down the lines. Slowly the wagons began to move, the Aiel leaving Perrin de Sen. Rand shook his head. Too much. Memories crowding together. The air seemed filled with sheet lightning. The wind swirled gritty dust into dancing whirlwinds. Muradin had clawed deep furrows in his face. He was digging at his eyes now. Forward. Kuman knelt at the edge of the plowed ground in his working clothes, plain brownish-gray coat and breeches and soft-laced boots, in a line with others like him that surrounded the field. 10 men of the Daishane Aiel, at twice-stretched arm length, and then an Ogier all the way around. He could see the next field lined the same way, beyond the soldiers with their shock lances sitting atop armored jokars. A hoverfly buzzed overhead in its patrol, a deadly black metal wasp containing 2 men. He was 16, and the women had decided his voice was finally deep enough to join in the seed singing. The soldiers fascinated him, men in Ogier, the way a colorful poisonous snake might, anyway. They killed. His father's great-father, Charn, claimed there had been no soldiers once, but Kuman did not believe it. If there were no soldiers, who would stop the Night Riders and the Trollocs from coming to kill everyone? Of course, Charn claimed there had not been any Myrddraal or Trollocs then, either. No Forsaken, no Shadowwrought. He had many stories he claimed were from a time before soldiers and Night Riders and Trollocs, when he said the Dark Lord of the Grave had been bound away, and no one knew his name or the word war. Kuman could not imagine such a world. The war had been old when he was born. He enjoyed Charn's stories, even if he could not make himself believe, but some earned the old man frowns and scoldings, like when he claimed to have served one of the Forsaken once. Not just any Forsaken, but Lanfear herself. As well say he had served Ishmael. If Charn had to make up stories, Kuman wished he could say he had served Lews Therin, the great leader himself. Of course, everyone would ask why he was not serving the dragon now, but that would be better than the way things were. Kuman did not like the way citizens looked at Charn when he said Lanfear had not always been evil. A stir at the end of the field told him one of the Nym was approaching. The great form, head and shoulders and chest taller than any Ogier, stepped out onto the seeded ground, and Kuman did not have to see to know he left footprints filled with sprouting things. It was Someshta, surrounded by clouds of butterflies, white and yellow and blue. Excited murmurs rose from the townspeople, and the folk whose fields these were gathered to watch. Each field would have its Nym now. Kuman wondered if he could ask Someshta about Charn's stories. He had spoken to him once, and Someshta was old enough to know if Charn was telling the truth. The Nym were older than anyone. Some said the Nym never died, not so long as plants grew, but this was no time to be thinking of questioning a Nym. The Ogier began it, as was fitting, standing to sing, great bass rumbles like the earth singing. The Aiel rose, men's voices lifting in their own song, even at the deepest pitch at a higher pitch than the Ogier. Yet the songs braided together, and Someshta took those threads and wove them into his dance. Gliding across the field in swooping strides, arms wide, butterflies swirling about him, landing on his spread fingertips. Kuman could hear the seed singing around the other fields, hear the woman clapping to urge the men on, their rhythm the heartbeat of new life, but it was a distant knowledge. The song caught him up, and he almost felt that it was himself, not the sounds he made, that Someshta wove into the soil and around the seeds. Seeds no longer, though. Zamai's sprouts covered the field, taller wherever the nymph's foot had trod. No blight would touch those plants, nor any insect. Seed sung, they would eventually grow twice as high as a man and fill the town's grain barns. This was what he had been born for, this song, and the other seed songs. He did not regret the fact that the Aes Sedai had passed him over at 10, saying he lacked the spark. To have been trained as Aes Sedai would have been wondrous, but surely no more so than this moment. The song faded slowly, the Aiel guiding its end. Someshta danced a few steps more after the last voices ceased, and it seemed the song still hung faintly in the air for as long as he moved. Then he stopped, and it was done. Kumin was surprised to see that the townspeople were gone, but he had no time to wonder where they had gone or why. The women were coming, laughing to congratulate the men. He was one of the men now, not a boy any longer, though the women alternated between kissing him on the lips and reaching up to ruffle his short red hair. It was then that he saw the soldier, only a few steps away, watching them. He had left his shock lance and fan-cloth battle cape somewhere, but he still wore his helmet, like some monstrous insect's head, its mandibles hiding his face through his black shock visor was raised. As if realizing he still stood out, the soldier pulled off the helmet, revealing a dark young man no more than 4 or 5 years older than Kumin. The soldier's unblinking brown eyes met his, and Kumin shivered. The face was only 4 or 5 years older, but those eyes. The soldier would have been chosen to begin his training at 10, too. Kumin was glad the Aiel were spared that choosing. One of the Ogier, Tomata, came over, tufted ears slanted forward inquisitively. "Do you have news, war man? I saw excitement among the Jokars while we sang." The soldier hesitated. "I suppose I can tell you, though it is not confirmed. We have a report that Lews Therin led the companions on a strike at Sheo Gul this morning at dawn. Something is disrupting communications, but the report is the Bore has been sealed, with most of the Forsaken on the other side. Maybe all of them." "Then it is over," Tomanda breathed. "Over at last. The light be praised." "Yes." The soldier looked around, suddenly seeming lost. I suppose it is. I suppose." He peered at his hands, then let them fall to his sides again. He sounded weary. "The local folk could not wait to begin celebrating. If the news is true, it might go on for days. I wonder if... No, they will not want soldiers joining them. Will you?" "For tonight, perhaps," Tomata said. "But we have 3 more towns to visit before our circuit is done." "Of course. You still have work to do. You have that." The soldier looked around again. "There are still Trollocs. Even if the Forsaken are gone, there are still Trollocs, and Night Riders." Nodding to himself, he started back toward the Jokars. Tomata did not appear excited at all, of course, but Kumin felt as stunned as the young soldier. The war was over? What would the world be like without war? Suddenly he had to talk to Charn. Sounds of merriment rolled out to meet him before he reached the town, laughing, singing. The bells in the town hall tower began ringing exuberantly. Townspeople danced in the streets, men and women and children. Kumin dodged between them, searching. Charn had elected to stay at one of the inns where the Aiel were putting up instead of coming to the singing. Even the Aes Sedai could no longer do much for the aches in his aged knees. But surely he would be out for this. Abruptly, something struck Kumin in the mouth, and his legs buckled. He was pushing himself to his knees before he realized he was down. A hand put to his mouth came away bloody. He looked up to find an angry-faced townsman standing over him, nursing a fist. "Why did you do that?" he asked. The townsman spat at him. "The Forsaken are dead. Dead, do you hear? Lanfear will not protect you anymore. We will rout out all of you who served the Forsaken while pretending to be on our side, and treat the lot of you as we treated that crazy old man." A woman was tugging at the man's arm. "Come away, Toma. Come away and hold your foolish tongue. Do you want the Ogier to come for you?" Suddenly wary, the man let her pull him away into the crowd. Struggling to his feet, Kumin began to run, heedless of the blood oozing down his chin. The inn was empty, silent. Not even the innkeeper was there, or the cook, or her helpers. Kumin ran through the building, shouting, "Jarn! Jarn! Jarn!" Out back, maybe. Charn liked to sit under the spice apple trees behind the inn and tell his stories of the days when he was young. Kumin ran out the back door and tripped, falling on his face. It was an empty boot that had caught his toe. One of Charn's red dress boots that he wore all the time, now that he no longer joined in the singing. Something made Kumin look up. Charn's white-haired body hung from a rope pulled over the ridgepole, 1 foot bare where he had kicked his boot off. The fingers of one hand caught at his neck where he had tried to pull the rope free. "Why?" Kumin said. "We are Da'Shain. Why?" There was no answer. Clutching the boot to his chest, he knelt there, staring up at Charn, as the noise of revelry washed over him. Rand quivered. The light from the columns was a shimmering blue haze that seemed solid, that seemed to claw the nerves out of his skin. The wind howled, one vast whirlwind sucking inward. Muradin had managed to veil himself. Bloody sockets stared blindly above the black veil. The Aiel was chewing, and bloody froth dripped onto his chest. Forward. Charn made his way down the side of the wide, crowded street beneath the spreading cora trees, their trefoil leaves spreading peace and contentment in the shadows of silvery buildings that touched the sky. A city without coras would seem bleak as wilderness. Jokars hummed quietly down the street, and a great white show wing darted across the sky, carrying citizens to Comel or Zora or somewhere. He seldom used the show wings himself. If he needed to go very far, an Aes Sedai usually traveled with him. But tonight he would, to Jin. Today was his 25th naming day, and tonight he intended to accept Nala's latest offer of marriage. He wondered if she would be surprised. He had been putting her off for a year, not wanting to settle down. It would mean changing his service to Zorel Sedai, whom Nala served, but Mirren Sedai had already given her blessing. He rounded a corner and just had time to see a dark, wide-shouldered man with a fashionably narrow beard before the man's shoulders sent him crashing onto his back, head bouncing onto the walkway so he saw spots. Dazed, he laid there. "Watch where you're going," the bearded man said irritably, adjusting his shirt-sleeveless red coat and flicking the lace at his wrists. His black hair hanging to his shoulders was gathered in back. That was the latest fashion, too, as near as anyone who had not been sworn to the Covenant would come to imitating Aiel. The pale-haired woman with him had laid a hand on his arm, her dress of shimmery white streath becoming more opaque with her sudden embarrassment. "Jom, look at his hair. He is Aiel, Jom." Feeling his head to see if it was cracked, Charn's fingers brushed through his short-cut, reddish-gold hair. He gave the longer tail at his nape a tug in lieu of the shaking his head. A bruise, he thought, but no more. "So he is." The man's annoyance vanished in consternation. "Forgive me, Da'Shain. I am the one who should be watching where he walks. Let me help you up." He was already suiting his words, hoisting Charn to his feet. "Are you all right? Let me call a jumper to take you where you're going." "I am not hurt, citizen," Charn said mildly. "Truly, it was my fault." It had been, hurrying like that. He could have injured the man. "Did I harm you? Please, forgive me." The man opened his mouth to protest. Citizens always did. They seemed to think Aiel were made of spyglass. But before he could speak, the ground rippled under their feet. The air rippled, too, in spreading waves. The man looked about uncertainly, pulling his stylish fan-cloth cloak around himself and his lady, so their heads seemed to float disembodied. "What is it, Da'Shain?" Others who had seen Charn's hair were gathered around him, anxiously asking the same questions, but he ignored them, not even thinking of whether he was being rude. He actually began to push through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the Sharam. The white sphere, 1,000 feet in diameter, floated as high above the blue and silver domes of the Kolam Dan. Mirren had said today was the day. She said she had found a new source for the one power. Female Aes Sedai and male would be able to tap the same source, not separate halves. What men and women could do united would be even greater now that there would be no difference. And today, she and Baidoman would tap it for the first time, the last time men and women would work together wielding a different power. Today. What seemed a tiny chip of white spun away from the Sharam in a jet of black fire. It descended, deceptively slow, insignificant. Then, 100 gouts spurted everywhere around the huge white sphere. The Sharam broke apart like an egg and began to drift down, falling, an obsidian inferno. Darkness spread across the sky, swallowing the sun in unnatural light, as if the light of those flames was blackness. People were screaming everywhere. With the first spurt of fire, Charn broke into a run towards the Kolam Dan, but he knew he was too late. He was sworn to serve Aes Sedai, and he was too late. Tears rolled down his face as he ran. Blinking to dispel the spots fluttering across his vision, Rand squeezed his head with both hands. The image still drifted through his head, that huge sphere, burning black, falling. Did I really see the hole being drilled into the Dark One's prison? Did I? He stood at the edge of the glass columns, staring out at Avan Dosora. A Korra tree. A city is a wilderness without Korras, and now there's only one. The columns sparkled in the blue glow from the dome of fog above, but once again the light seemed only brilliant reflections. There was no sign of Muradin. He did not think the Aiel had come out of the glass forest, or ever would. Suddenly something caught his eye, low in the branches of the Tree of Life. A shape swinging slowly. A man, hanging from a pole laid across 2 branches by a rope around his neck. With a wordless roar, he ran for the tree, grabbing at saidin, the fiery sword coming into his hands as he leaped, slashing at the rope. He and Mat hit the dusty white paving stones with twin thuds. The pole jarred free and clattered down beside them. Not a pole, but an odd black-hafted spear with a short sword blade in place of a spear point, slightly curved and single-edged. Rand would not have cared if it was made of gold and kundilar set with sapphires and fire drops. Letting sword and power go, he ripped the rope away from Mat's neck and pressed an ear to his friend's chest. Nothing. Desperately, he tore open Mat's coat and shirt, breaking the leather cord that held a silver medallion on Mat's chest. He tossed the medallion aside, listened again. Nothing. No heartbeat. Dead. No. He'd be all right if I hadn't let him follow me here. I can't let him be dead. As hard as he could, he pounded his fist against Mat's chest. Listened. Nothing. Again he hammered. Listened. Yes. Yes, there. A faint heartbeat. It was. So faint, so slow, and slowing. But Mat was still alive despite the heavy purple welt around his neck. He might yet be kept alive. Filling his lungs, Rand scrambled around to breathe into Mat's mouth as strongly as he could. Again. Again. Then he leaped astride Mat, seized the waist of his breeches, and heaved upward, lifting his hips off the pavement. Up and down 3 times, and then back to breathing into his mouth. He could have channeled. He might have been able to do something that way. The memory of that girl in the stone stopped him. He wanted Matt to live. Live, not be a puppet moved by the power. Once, back in Emmons Field, he had seen Master Luan revive a boy who had been found floating in the wine spring water. So he breathed and heaved, breathed and heaved, and prayed. Abruptly, Matt jerked, coughed. Rand knelt beside him as he put both hands to his throat and rolled onto his side, sucking air in an agonized rattle. Matt touched the piece of rope with one hand and shivered. "Those flaming sons of goats," he muttered hoarsely. "They tried to kill me." "Who did?" Rand asked, looking around warily. Half-finished palaces around the great littered square stared back at him. Surely Rhuidean was empty except for the two of them, unless Muradin was still alive somewhere. "The folks on the other side of that twisted doorway." Swallowing painfully, Matt sat up and took a deep, unsteady breath. "There's one here too, Rand." He still sounded as if his throat had been rasped. "You could go through it? Did they answer questions?" That could be useful. He desperately needed more answers. 1,000 questions and too few answers. "No answers," Matt said huskily. "They cheat. And they tried to cheat me." He picked up the medallion, a silver fox head that almost filled his palm, and after a moment stuffed it into his pocket with a grimace. "I got something out of them, at least." Pulling the strange spear to him, he ran his fingers along the black shaft. A line of some strange cursive script ran its length, bracketed by a pair of birds inlaid in metal even darker than the wood. Ravens, Rand thought they were. Another pair were engraved on the blade. With a rough, wry laugh, Matt levered himself to his feet, half leaning on the spear, the sword blade beginning just level with his head. He did not even bother to lace up his shirt or button his coat. "I'll keep this, too. Their joke, but I'll keep it." "A joke?" Rand asked. And Matt nodded. "Well, what it says?" "It says, 'Thus is our treaty written. Thus is agreement made. Thought is the arrow of time. Memory never fades. What was asked is given. The price is paid.' A pretty joke, you see. I'll slice them with their own wit if I ever get the chance. I'll give them thought and memory." He winced, scrubbing a hand through his hair. "Light, but my head hurts. It's spinning like 1,000 bits of dreams, and every one a needle. Do you think Moraine will do something for it if I ask?" "I'm sure she will," Rand replied slowly. Matt had to be hurting badly if he sought the Aes Sedai's help. He looked at the dark spear shaft again. Most of the script was hidden by Matt's hand, but not all. Whatever it was, Rand had no idea what it said. How had Matt? Rhuidean's empty windows stared at him mockingly. "We hide many secrets still," they seemed to say. "More than you know. Worse than you know." "Let's go back now, Matt. I don't care if we have to cross the valley in the night. As you said, it will be cooler. I don't want to stay in here any longer." "That sounds just fine to me," Matt said, coughing. "As long as we can get another drink of water at the fountain." Rand kept his pace to Matt's, which was slow at first, hobbling along using the odd spear as a walking staff. He paused to look at the two figurines of a man and woman holding crystal spheres, but he left them there. Not yet. Not for a long time yet, if he was lucky. When they left the square behind, the unfinished palaces rearing along the street had a threatening look, their jagged tops like the walls of great fortresses. Rand embraced Saidin, though he saw no real threat, but he felt it, as though murderous eyes were boring into his back. Rhuidean lay peaceful and empty, shadowless in the blue glow of its fog roof. The dust in the streets rippled in the wind. The wind. There was no wind. "Oh, burn me," Matt muttered. "I think we're in trouble, Rand. It's what I get for staying around you. You always get me in trouble." The ripples came faster, sliding together to make thicker lines, quivering still. "Can you walk faster?" Rand asked. "Walk? Blood and ashes, I can run!" Slanting the spear across his chest, Matt suited his words with a lurching gallop. Running alongside, Rand brought his sword back, uncertain of what he could do with it against the shivering lines of dust, uncertain that there really was need. It was only dust. "No, it bloody isn't. It's one of those bubbles. The Dark One's evil, drifting along the pattern, seeking out bloody ta'veren. I know it is." All around them, dust rippled and shivered even thicker, bunching and gathering. Suddenly, right in front of them, a shape reared up in the basin of a dry fountain. A solid man shape, dark and featureless, with fingers like sharp claws. Silently, it leaped at them. Rand moved instinctively. The moon rises over water, and the blade of power sliced through that dark figure. In a twinkling, it was only a thick cloud of dust drifting toward the pavement. Others replaced it, though, black, faceless shapes rushing in from all sides, no two alike, but all with reaching claws. Rand danced the forms among them, blade weaving intricate patterns in the air, leaving floating motes behind. Matt used his spear like a quarterstaff, a spinning blur, but bringing the sword blade into it as if he had always used the weapon. The creatures died, or at least returned to dust, but they were many and quick. Blood poured down Rand's face, and the old wound in his side burned on the point of splitting open. Red spread across Matt's face too, and down his chest. Too many and too quick. "You do not do a 10th part of what you are capable of already." That was what Lanfear had told him. He laughed as he danced the swords. Learn from one of the Forsaken. He could do that, if not the way she intended. Oh, yes, he could. He channeled, wove strands of the power, and sent a whirlwind into the middle of each black shape. They exploded in clouds of dust that left him coughing. As far as he could see, dust settled from the air. Hacking and panting, Matt leaned on his dark-shafted spear. "Did you do that?" He wheezed, wiping blood away from his eyes. "About time. If you knew how, why didn't you bloody do it in the first place?" Rand started to laugh again. And he thought to himself, because I didn't think of it. Because I didn't know how until I did it. But it froze in his mouth. Dust drifted out of the air, and as it settled on the ground, it began to ripple. "Run," he said. "We have to get out of here. Run!" Side by side they sped for the fog, slashing at any lines of dust that seemed to be thickening, kicking at them, anything to keep them from coalescing. Rand sent whirlwinds swirling wildly in every direction. Dispelled dust began shivering back together immediately, even before it reached the ground now. They kept running, into the fog and through, bursting out into dim, sharp-shadowed light. Side aching, Rand spun, ready to try lightning or fire, anything. Nothing came through the fog after them. Maybe the mist was a wall to those dark shapes. Maybe it held them in. Maybe... He did not know. He did not really care so long as the things could not follow. "Burn me," Matt said hoarsely. "We were in there all night. It's nearly sunrise. I didn't think it was that long." Rand stared at the sky. The sun had not topped the mountains yet. A painfully brilliant nimbus outlined the jagged peaks. Long shadows covered the valley floor. And he thought, "He will come from Rhuidean at dawn and tie you together with bonds you cannot break. He will take you back, and he will destroy you." "Let's go back up the mountain," he said quietly. "They will be waiting for us." But in his head he thought, "For me." That's the end of the chapter. Alright, so that was nearly an hour. Pause this right now to process everything that happened if you haven't already thought about it. I'm going to give it like a 5-second pause and then start talking about it. Starting now. Okay. So, hopefully you thought about it by this point. So, we had two things happen there. We had Matt, who went into the Terre Angriel for the second time, but found, like, the first time he went in, it was like fox people, but these people reminded him of snakes. And these people did not answer his questions. They basically hung him, and then Matt came out of it with, like, for some reason, a random ass spear and a medallion of some kind, a fox head medallion. And they apparently hung him to die, but Rand managed to get there in time, thankfully. So that's one thing. Rand, if you haven't, this is the hard one, because obviously this was very emotional and very long and impactful. And this, what Rand saw, is supposed to be what every Aiel clan chief and the Wise Ones see when they go to Rhuidean. And so we started out talking about the Gen Aiel, right? And the Gen Aiel were like, all clan chiefs of the Aiel must come to Rhuidean to be a clan chief, or they will die. And all the Wise Ones were like, we need to do it. And the clans that said they wouldn't are no longer in existence today. And then we went back in time even more. And it kept going back and back until you realized, okay, the Aiel were not always the warriors that they were today. They eventually were nomads trying to bring these items that the Aes Sedai entrusted to them. And they were not always warriors. They followed the way of the leaf. What the Tinkers do. So if you remember, there was a split between those that follow the way of the leaf and those who took up the spears to defend themselves and those they love. Those that kept the spears kept the name Aiel. Those that follow the way of the leaf were split also between the Gen Aiel, but also we know another group who follows the way of the leaf, don't we? The Tinkers. The ones that abhor violence. Which means the Aiel came from the way of the leaf, and they were changed in their journey of hundreds and thousands of years through all their hardship. And the Aiel exiled themselves to the waste and watched the items, whereas the rest of the Tinkers, they gave up on it to try to find the song. And if you remember, the Tinkers are all obsessed with the song. And, you know, we really don't know what that song is. I like to think that it's kind of hinted at that the song at the second to last or third to last one, that flashback we saw, where they were singing to grow things with the Ogier, I kind of like to think that that might have been the song. But I don't think that's a very accepted opinion. So the Tinkers are, you know, looking for the song, which they will know, and it will bring peace, right? And so right now we have a split, and it sounds like the Aiel do not know where they came from. Only the clan chiefs and the Wise Ones know. And we saw how one person, Muradin, was reacting to learning this knowledge. He clawed his own eyes out. So that series of flashbacks, every single one, which you probably got because, you know, in one flashback, a person would be old, and then the next flashback, you would follow that old person when they were young. So it kept going back a generation pretty much every single time, right? So every flashback was earlier in time, all the way until we saw one of the Forsaken, who goes by Mirren. We saw her opening the prison to the Dark One, where everything began. So that's where I'm going to end this one. I would digest all that for a while. It is, that sequence is considered one of the best in all of Wheel of Time. It doesn't even focus on our main characters, of course, but the way that that story is told, even to me, is very impactful. And honestly, you probably heard it in my voice sometimes, but very difficult to read out loud, because it was just so powerful. So I hope you enjoyed it, and the next time you join me, we'll go back to a little parent action, why don't we? All right.